So I started compiling all of the information and then also incorporating AI into it. So I created the platform admitme.com, that's with two T's. And it basically getting feedback from all of the parents, students on what they're looking for. So with my background in different fields, education is something I have not done before. So it was very interesting, but I'm enjoying the process. And also, I started a podcast called AI Unfiltered. And this is a podcast because I'm really diving deep into AI and the different LLMs coming up and even all of the research that's coming up. And what's going on is that there's a lot of hype in the industry right now. And I want to break the hype from the actual use cases. So I actually interview industry leaders and people who are using AI in their business. What are the challenges? How are they using it? So you can learn from them. You can also avoid some of the mistakes they're making. And that's my goal, to separate the hype from the actual practicalness of what AI is offering us. And if you're asking, is AI taking over our jobs? I'll answer it now. No, it's not. With that, I'll handle it, give it back to Bashar.
So if some of you were here for that question, you can drop off. But please don't. It's going to be a very interesting discussion. And what I really love about your journeys is that you started probably somewhere very different and then were in different fields and then ended up here. So it just solidifies that concept that careers are no longer linear. They are like a jungle gym now these days. And where you start is not necessarily where you'll end up. And similarly, what you study is not necessarily what you might be doing full time. Great, fantastic. All right, so let's travel back in time, November 2022. GPT 3.5 launched, and suddenly metaverse was no longer the buzzword. Sorry, Facebook. It became LLMs and generative AI. So, what were you working around that time, and how did things evolve for you or your team or your company? We can go in reverse order. We can start with Mamta.
Yeah, so AI and Gen AI became the buzzword, but we have to realize that AI and machine learning is nothing new. It's been going on the 70s. And this is something, I've worked on AI projects in the companies I worked for. We just used to call it modeling or predictive modeling or, basically machine learning, but it wasn't the Gen AI. We didn't have access. So one thing that changed is that we had access to LLMs that we didn't have before. So when it came around, it definitely increased the ease. So I started dabbling onto it. I wanted to play around on what this has to offer. So I started looking into it. I took some of the courses in deep learning AI, specifically to these LLMs. And AI is a really, really big field. So, Gen AI is a small part of it. And then there is like vision and audio components to it. And we just use them all interchangeably. So with that, that's where I was. I started looking more into it. I created a couple of my own projects. I created my code reviewer BFF, and that's before Copilot had their own code reviewer. And then I also created using the Department of Health's data on what they were researching with, or all of the studies that was happening around the foods that was, is bread good for health? Is wine good for heart? All of these things. But the data is available. Again, it's not very readable format. So I use the data from Department of Health and then combine it with the APIs that were available from the different LLMs, and then created just, a Vercel app to showcase that. So that was my way of going into that. And at that time, I was already making admitme.com. So I decided to incorporate that because there's a lot of changes in the college admission processes. It's like very hard to even know, hey, is this college accepting ACT? Do we need recommendation? What kind of application is required? So I decided to include, and people just like they've gotten used to Google search, they are getting used to just asking questions in plain English. So I incorporated that. I used the So for me, for admitme.com, I'm using the data that's available from Department of Education, iPad. So I won't rely on the actual data so that there's less hallucinations. And then I'm incorporating that with the NLP, the natural language processing, and then making that available. So that's where I was, and that's what I've been up to. Rebecca.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so let's see. Thinking back, so I remember specifically, there was November 2022, and then I think followed quickly by the announcement of ChatGPT, or perhaps that's what you're referring to. And there are sort of two distinct things I remember if I put myself back in that time. One is I remember the news of the announcement of ChatGPT. It was something that spread over the weekend. So a lot of my colleagues and I, we were over the weekend taking in as much as we possibly could, and it was really interesting to see. When we came back on Monday, how different people were reacting to this new development. I remember the first person who reached out was an engineer on the team who sort of had written this email laying out all the ways that students could use it to cheat on their writing or on our product. So there is definitely a number of people reacting with that sort of fear and some level of pessimism, but also being of course, this has been something, a real concern that has continued to evolve, that conversation around student cheating. But then on the other side, there are those of us who are sort of thinking, wow, this is going to totally change the way that we teach students, the types of skills that are going to be most important for them to learn. This is totally game changing. And so, yeah, I think that was sort of that dichotomy or sort of spectrum was really telling. And I think there's a lot of soul searching required to think, where on that spectrum are we? We want to be maximally responsive and forward facing, while also making thoughtful decisions and avoiding hype, like you were saying, or avoiding panic. That's all easier said than done, of course. I mean, what we ended up doing was similar to, I think, a lot of companies. We looked at our vision, we looked at our strategy, our use cases, and asked, where does Gen AI let us solve problems we're already trying to solve, but perhaps in a better or faster way? So there is more a case of maintaining our strategy and objectives, but adjusting the tactics. And then in other places, where does it let us solve new problems that we previously didn't think we could tackle through our product? And so that's the places where there are perhaps larger changes to our vision and our strategy, because now all these new things are possible.
I loved all these stories, and Rebecca and Mamta, you mentioned. So I have a slightly different experience, and I have the luxuries of started at building teams to do deep learning development since 2015. So my teams actually have been followed pretty closely with OpenAI's development. And by the time I move on to change, at the time, I also took over a couple engineers with me. So we have been pretty closely monitoring some of the development in ChatGPT and GPT. And I think at the time, though, specifically back in 2022, we're more closely looking at some of the results from 2.0 in the time. And we were pretty, at the time, we have this illusion that, oh no, these things are not quite working. It's not quite there. So we still have our actual development strategy and the ML strategy still focus on our implementing our own models. Until exactly like everybody mentioned, in November when the 3 and 3.0 comes out, all of a sudden things are different. Some of the we realize we're not as good as 3.0, or it's so obvious, and on these trajectories, and it's going to surpass some of our own models. So I actually make it a big deal in our February last year. In February, we have a all team offsite, a product and engineering offsite. We make that engineering team from a technology innovation discussion standpoint. This is a big topic. We actually spent a whole morning have the ML team to give demos on some of our experiments and comparing GPT-3 and 3.5 at the time, and some of the projects that we've done, and not to showcase what could be, not to showcase our progress, but more really try to ignite the discussions and conversations. Because at the time, fundamentally, there's a lot of fear in a company like Change, as you can imagine, because we very much focus on social impacts. So there's a huge fear on what potential harm any of the mistakes would be, come from the models, to the point that, there's a fear to even want to engage in this kind of solutions. And I want to switch the mindset. So long story short, and as we see the results and progress, and we open up a lot of discussions among cross-functional teams, and not just product designer and engineer, but also with our campaigners on the field, which is the game changer for us. And then we actually help us to reshift the development focus, investment focus, maybe not just building features anymore, but actually tackle some of the internal operations, user safety and trust. Trust and safety is huge undertaking, their legal practice, and many of those, which is become very relevant to utilize all these models, and at the same time also recognize LLM is not going to solve all the problems that we have. And so some of the other things we still need to continue to work on, or using different kind of libraries and packages, and potential build our own models to do that. So it's a pretty exciting time, and definitely get a lot of people excited, and also highlight the importance of go back to the foundational things is what problem we're trying to solve, what problem that worth solving, right?
What problem is worth solving? That's beautifully said. And I really found interesting when you said that generative AI was not only used for feature development, but also for internal operations. And that's something I would like to dig a little deeper on. So in your experience, how has Gen AI changed the day-to-day work of developers and engineers? How are they using it in their workflows? What's the mindset that needs to be there so that we use it? We are not afraid of it, we use it, but we are still careful about it. We can start with, Elaine.
So a few things I can think about. I actually have quite a bit of discussion with different engineering leaders on this. So what I can share is something that we have done back in Change, and some of the things that I advise some teams on, and what I heard some other teams are doing. Out of the box, definitely coding. There's code generations and code completion and suggestions. I'm not saying that make developer lazy, but I want to make sure that developer can be more efficient. And automated refactoring, code translations. So those are the important piece. And quality, help out automated unit tests. And I hope that everybody will use Copilot and all of these tools into unit tests, and no longer an excuse to be too much work. That should be built in. And also help the QA team to do test automation, automate code reviews, so that we can actually have better coverage, right? And I just recently learned different teams and or startups and building on test case creation, to automated test case creation based on product and use case or user stories. So those are the basics. And the next thing you can talk about the cybersecurity performance management improvements. So those things are inside out, outside in kind of pen tests, help performance optimizations. And the next thing, the base, is we mentioned about collaboration, documentations, development experience. And I think the last piece I want to highlight, developer experience, is a lot of time companies, especially in startups, simply don't have the resource and investment on those, right? But that really hinder developers' productivities and their engagements, and also impact their career growth too. So I think with all these tools in Gen AI, we can help develop the code explanation, documentation, help code search, and help the define an area that we can actually quicker for people to onboard new developers. And all these will improve the developers' experience, and hopefully will get them more engaged, right?
That's just beautiful. I was taking notes as you were saying things. Rebecca?
Yeah, so I'd say my lens is a little bit different. I guess to add on to some of the things that you had mentioned, Elaine, one thing we've been thinking about a lot is just how to build up the skills and capacity on our team for this new type of development. And one thing that we found is that, you know, making that space for the work on the internal tools or more operational things has been a good way to also help the team just learn and develop these skills. So that's one way we've thought about it. I'll say also that Elaine, you mentioned campaigners at change.org being this other part of the team. For us in education, we have these teams now that are product managers, engineers, data practitioners, and then curriculum specialists are the sort of the educational role, subject matter expert. And so it's been really interesting to see how this, you know, non-technical role, curriculum specialist, with this new type of development, they've really been able to get into the mix, and it's really helped quite a bit to have them be able to play a key role in thinking through new approaches, questioning approaches, making suggestions. And so I think there's sort of been, I guess there's maybe a bit of democratizing of this technical work and making room for a larger swath of stakeholders to be involved, which has been really interesting to see.
Really good points, Elaine and Rebecca. I think you covered most of the use cases. So anything that improves developer efficiency, productivity, we have seen the use cases of that. I just want to add one additional layer to it. So these tools are great. Yes, we should not be afraid of them, and we need to be upskilling us to make sure we are capable of using it and changing the mindset of the developers that this is just like, you know, when compilers came around, do you really want to now compile, take your, you know, cards and go to the compiler and code, you know, compile your code and then bring it back? Or do you want to just have it automatically compiled? So it's similar to the way that this can help us, but at the current state, there's still like a little bit, these tools are like teenagers. So you still have to watch them, because you know, they can get drunk and they can hallucinate and they can cause car crashes, and you have to make sure that something like CrowdStrike or anything like that doesn't happen. So imagine now you have, you know, you have something like a bug fix that's going to go out to such critical customers without any oversight, without any guardrails. That's one thing. So make sure that, you know, there is human oversight. Use it as a helper, use it as a calculator. It improves the efficiency, but it's, you know, don't use it completely. It's like, you know, when mom and dad goes out for the weekend, the kids start to have a party. So we don't want that. The second thing is make sure that any data you're using. So first of all, using enterprise licenses, because it provides you a little bit more protection for your company and for your data. Still make sure you're reviewing those in some cadence, because we saw what happened with Slack. Even if you had an enterprise license, Slack came out that unless you opt out, this data will be used for training their models. So, you know, have an enterprise license, review those terms and guidelines in some cadence, and then make sure that anything you're doing, you're able to isolate it. So if anything goes off the rails, then at least it's protected inside a firewall or protected inside a container that you can somehow isolate the damage. So yes, use them as tools, but provide guardrails.
I just love that the tools are like teenagers. They require some oversight. You made a excellent point, Mamta, that we need to be focused on the protection for the company and for data. So zooming out on this question a bit, we were talking about developer experience. Let's talk about the executive layer. So what are some of the key challenges enterprises are facing when they think about integrating Gen AI into their existing software or software ecosystem? We can start with you, Mamta.
Yeah, so I would like to just go back on that point, that make sure that, so for an executive perspective, let me step back a little bit. Be very clear on what are the use cases you want to have AI tackle. Right now, what we are seeing is AI just being used as a buzzword. oh, like everyone is doing, it's like peer pressures. You're in high school, everyone's doing AI. We have to do AI without, and then like telling our teams, go figure it out. So be very clear whether it's for internal efficiency, it's for external. And then there's different playbooks for each of those that you need to follow. If you are delivering AI tools to other companies or users to use it, there are laws and compliance and regulations you have to follow. And those are also evolving. If you're using it for internal tools and efficiency within the company, then again, figure out what needs to be optimized, right? Like coding is one thing we have found out. Unit testing, Elaine said, there's no excuse now. So find out for developer productivity, for your other teams, what productivity and efficiency is lacking. Don't do it just because, like your peers in the same industry are doing it. Do it for the right reasons, because of course there's costs associated with it. It's not cheap. Even Copilot is, I think, $20 per seat per. So it does add up. And then the second thing is that you're sharing data just because, and don't fall for tools that are just free, because nothing is free. They're using it somehow. There could be, a beta that they're just giving it for free, but later there will be a cost associated with it. So look at the return of investment. What are you going to invest in it? What is the cost? What is the training cost? Because there will be training and onboarding cost. What is the protection cost? Now you have to think about how to, put guardrails around it. There will be compliance regulations, even for using Copilot tools. For some companies, there are compliance and regulations you have to make sure you're meeting. Specifically, if you're like an HR company, you have from other, and you're a SaaS company, you have data from other companies as well. And for example, if you're using some efficiency for HR within your own company, even though you're not dealing with other companies' data, you still have your own employee data that you need to protect, and there's privacy ethics to it. So just to summarize, find out what are the use cases internally and externally, find out the return on investment, and find out the playbook, the return on investment on it for each of those.
Love the way you summarize it towards the end. Rebecca, what has been your experience?
Yeah, I could take this from maybe a different angle, which is that where Nordic is developing software for school districts, and that's sort of when we think of an enterprise organization, we're thinking of a school district. So some of our learnings there have been similar to all enterprise developments, or the principles you want to keep in mind. One is to really think about the different personas in the ecosystem, and making sure we're really looking at problems from all the different angles. Because in our case, in the case of Gen AI, I think what's sort of unique for Gen AI in school districts is that the needs of different personas are really, in some cases, conflicting. They're really different, and in some cases, they're conflicting. So if we think about a school district, it's everyone from the superintendent down to the teachers, and then the students who we care most about, of course. And so for any one thing, of course, cheating has been a hot topic, but if you look at how that's handled at different levels, if you were to purely focus on the teacher problem of how do I prevent misuse and how do I prevent cheating, you would really ignore this whole other big problem for students, and maybe would develop a more punitive feature. Whereas if you look at it from the student angle, well, the question is more, how do we prepare students with the skills that they're going to need for future success? How do we equip them with the knowledge they need, the academic integrity, knowledge, the ability to use AI responsibly, and not misuse it? So I think we've run into a few lessons here where this is a place where it's so important to think of the whole ecosystem and just how different features are going to be experienced by everyone in that ecosystem.
Yeah, so clients is not just one entity. There are layers to that as well.
Yeah.
Nicely said. Elaine, your experience?
I think, both Mamta and Rebecca already mentioned quite a bit. I think from a executive standpoint, it still go back to one of my favorite topics. The leadership's number one responsibility is to set the goal with what problem what is the vision, what is the angle, what problem we're trying to solve, right? We all know the technology, AI, whenever technologies come before us, they can always make the solution better. They can always solve the problem to some degree, right? But we have finite amount of resources. So what is the prioritization, what problem we're trying to solve? How can we carve out that little space, a box to this, that we can put effort in and really solve the problem? And AI or not, it's just a tool to solve the problem. I think at the same time, I also think that my experience to get the team started, to make sure that we can get an early win, it's actually really good to tackle some of the internal operational challenges first, especially in the AI era, because it's something LLM, everybody can actually utilize it right now to some degree. So getting people to use it to ease that fear is important. And then from that we can see, for example, it's at Change, we actually tackle the legal part first, the user trust and safety first, which is traditionally is probably the group that have the biggest pushback on utilize tools like AI and things like that, and get those people on board, figure out a way to collaborate and together and learn the pros and cons and the challenges. It's a good learning experience for cross-functional teams. So from that point on, that we really open up the opportunity for everybody from different teams who can contribute on what is the next problem we can solve and how can we mitigate the risks.
I just love the point that you figure out where the biggest pushback is going to come from and start from there, because it might not be technical, it might be another team like legal. And we talked about a little bit about laws and compliances, and let's focus more on the ethical considerations. Of course, it includes all that: legal, security, compliance, policies. And this is a topic our attendees are most interested in as well, because a couple of questions that we got at the time of registration was focused on this. So what are the ethical considerations when deploying generative AI in software development, whether internal or external? Rebecca?
Yeah, such a great and meaty topic. I'd say, I think across all industries, we're in the early days of establishing policies and principles and evaluation measures. But that's especially true in education, which just generally tends to be slower moving than others. So with that in mind, the mindset I think the whole team needs to take is just to be very vigilant and proactive in addressing these challenges, because the guardrails aren't necessarily there yet for us as an industry. So for our part, so we're building learning experiences. We want to build learning experiences that are safe, that are unbiased, that are effective, that are fair for all students. That's something we've always cared about. So we've had these principles in place, but now they're even more top of mind with the increased sort of risk we take on there with Gen AI. And so, there's all the usual things, complying with standards, transparency, evaluating the effectiveness of our features on student learning outcomes. Perhaps something that I think is sort of interesting about education Gen AI development is that from our industry's perspective, the types of concerns we have, we're not simply interested in the accuracy or correctness of a model's output. For example, does it solve this math problem correctly? Does it write a well-worded essay? We're interested in how well does it do at teaching a student teaching them the skills they need to solve that math problem, or teaching them the skills they need to write that essay on their own. And so we're also thinking about, is this able to teach students without giving away the answer? Is it at the right level for a student who's in 3rd grade versus 12th grade? Is it working with students with unique learning needs? There's all these sort of additional considerations we have to wrap our brains around. I'll say finally, like we've both of you have echoed this quite a bit already, but the use case is really, we have to be very, very thoughtful about our use cases. And I'm, you know, I think we all feel especially protective of students in this case. So that's a place where we've been somewhat conservative actually with, you know, building, you know, so far we've released features where they're teacher facing. We don't feel that, we haven't felt that it's quite yet for prime time with students. And so just being really thoughtful and determining, is this technology ready for a particular use case? Is it going to help students with their learning, or could it have be detrimental in any way? So that's been our approach.
Thank you for sharing that, Mamta.
Yeah, very good point, Rebecca. It's so important, and there's just so many considerations in ethics that we need to consider. I can talk about it for hours since we don't have that much time. I will say that it starts from the very basic building block, which is the data. So if there is biases and there is already things going around with data where these ethical concerns are there, it's going to show up in LLMs. So the analogy I like to use is the juicer analogy, where, you know, just because something is made in the juicer doesn't mean it's healthy. Yes, if you put fruits and veggies in it, you'll get a healthy drink. But now if you start adding lots of sugar and chocolate and other things onto it, it is not a healthy drink anymore. So the data is very, very important. And you've already seen cases and the news coming out where they had to roll back changes with OpenAI, with Google, you know, where things are not working properly because it's either not been testing or it was an edge case that they didn't realize it. And then we are running out of data. So, you know, there's like web scraping going on. There's like privacy ethics. There's so many things going on. And so when I think of this, I think there is definitely responsibility that comes down to all of us. So you know, we talk about policies and regulations. So I think about it like all of this needs to be regulated at 3 levels. One is the government level. Of course, we talked about it. There needs to be compliance, there needs to be laws, and even, you know, EU, UN, US, they all have like all of the acronyms that we can think of are coming up with their own laws. And then that's going to be, again, a guideline. They're not going to tell you exactly what to do. There's going to be repercussions and fines. And if you look at how social media has evolved, we all knew the dangers of that coming in, but there's still lawsuits going on today on what it has done. So these laws are also going to be evolved based on how they're being dealt. So that's the first one on the government level and legislation level. The second one is on the company level. As a company, and, you know, for the people, like, it doesn't matter what role you're playing in the company. You're in HR, you're in legal, you're in accounting, wherever you are, you need to ask the questions. Everyone has a right to ask questions and make sure that the company is, if you're, you know, using the LLM models, how are you using the data? Hey, how is this data being used? Ask those questions. How are we keeping the data secure and private? What happens if a hacker gets in? What kind of data do they have access to? What kind of data is going back? Is it stored in cloud? Is it on-prem? So ask those questions. Anyone can ask those questions. And a lot of the companies, especially the big ones, they already have their legal departments working on that. But if you are a startup, please make sure that you do follow those guidelines. It's very, very important. And then the third one is at a personal level. As a human being, you should be doing what, you know, like using these tools. Please be mindful of them. It's the same. I believe we're at the same time when MySpace had come out, if you are old enough like me to remember that. And then, you know, all of the, we heard about cybercrime for the first time. We heard about different kind of hackings for the first time. That's what's happening right now. So there's prompt injections, there's man-in-the-middle attack, there's DDoS attacks. We think we are smart, hackers are much smarter than us. So be careful and mindful of the data you're sharing. One example I'll give is like, there are tools that say, hey, and it's a free tools. There's multiple websites where you can upload your selfie and they'll give you a professional looking picture that you can use. That's wonderful. I mean, I've looked at the pictures. It all looks great. But do you know how they're going to use your data now? Your picture is now going to be used to train their models. And if you're a parent, please educate your kids, because it's, again, that social media, that internet time again. So please make sure to tell your kids, what are the data? What is it sharing? Nothing is ever free. Nothing is ever lost on the internet. So those are the 3 levels: the government level, the company level, and at a personal level.
Loved it, especially the point about teaching your kids, because they're going to get exposure of this, whether you like it or not. So having a strategy in place is extremely important. Elaine?
Yeah, I don't think I can add any more if Mamta and Rebecca mentions, this different way to tackle this problem. I just want to give a little bit different perspective. We can regulate everything out of everything, right? I remember when I learned about computer security back in the days. You know what is the most secure system? It's a system that is not running, right? We just need to unplug it. That's the only guaranteed way to have a completely secure system. Is the system is not running. So I'm so happy to see the regulation, the discussion on the ethics and is going on. And I started talking about responsible AI back in 2016, and I will continue to support this. But I also want us to make sure that as we doing these regulations, what we really need to double down on is fast track our development to solve the good problem, to build out good solution that actually change people's life for the better. That's the only way, because we can be afraid of trying to just not doing much, or we can also double down on, if the good people are moving faster than the bad guys, we're in better shape, right? So it's not just regulation in this, which we really need to open up the possibilities and bring in more better values and see the good solution, the solution that actually bring in value to and improve people's life, address real problems. And I think that is really is the ultimate solutions there. Otherwise, we end up just have regulations, but there are no advancements.
Regulations, but no advancements. It's the most secure systems that is not running. I'm going to use this in a few conversations, Elaine, with your permission. In the same realm, a couple of questions came up at the time of registration where people were really interested in learning more about generative AI in education. So allow me to share this reference with you. It's an article by Harvard Business Publishing, their education department. And this article is actually a collection of 4 articles that covers things like what teachers can do, how can we add it in schools, how can we add it for research, for graduate school, and what are the various use cases that generative AI made available. So very readable. These are not research papers, they're very readable articles, but if you're interested in generative AI in education, I would recommend that. All right, moving more towards audience questions. Thing came up in the Q&A, and it was also part of the registration question as well. So what are some of the most promising applications of generative AI that we might see emerging? And let me just add a little bit more to it, or some concrete use cases that you have already seen in the market and doing well. All right, Elaine?
So few things. First of all, by no means that I think I can predict what is the most promising. Otherwise, we've been doing that. But I want to say that a few things. Obviously, the number one thing we all see being impacted, whether or not it's enterprise or personal life, is productivity, right? I hope that we all feel like, at least personally, I feel like my English writing is improved, in the last 18 months, some of the application from an industrial standpoint, I think healthcare is very promising. It's a big area. I literally just have this conversation yesterday with another friend of mine, talk about the impact on radiology, for example, right? If we put aside the potential, what means it impacted the doctors, but think about this: radiologists are thinking about is just learning the pattern matching in their own heads, right? Previously. And now we can actually have AI to do the jobs and have the doctors to validate. And so it's just a huge improvement. And then from that point, you can think about drug discoveries. All the medical imaging analysis and drug discovery could be impacted. And I think there's a lot of movement there. And similarly, you're talking about images and you can think about climate modeling. And I think that's an area that definitely I personally very much interested in. Emission and sustainability, energy optimization, those are areas that I want to see. And from that, you can move to energy grids and all those areas and agriculture. And you all talk about the education. So I think those are the areas that I'm more really interesting to. But unfortunately, or fortunately, depending which point of view you have, and I see more investments in fintechs in area. So I just hope that there will be people who listen here, especially if you're students or just early in your career, pay attention to some of the area that have not yet get as much investment as they should. Especially manufacturing, climate, energies, and agriculture tax and education tax. Yeah.
Nice. Talking about it, Rebecca, your thoughts?
Sorry, I lost you for a second. Yeah, so I think yeah, I think just building on some of what Elaine said of just where are the impact-oriented places where we can, apply great minds and achieve great results. I think obviously I'm going to talk about education, and it's been what I've found in my experience at Neuralink is just sort of the power of when you apply educator experience with this new technology. One thing that we did recently was released what we called a grading assistant feature, which uses Gen AI to help teachers grade student writing and add feedback. And this was going not to, the goal here was not to build an AI feature. The goal here was to solve problems that have sort of plagued teachers since the beginning, which is that, we want students to be writing as much as possible. Writing volume is extremely important. That's the way students grow as writers. But the barrier is that writing is very hard to assign, very hard, time consuming for teachers to grade. So Gen AI, this is sort of a perfect use case for us. And with the feature that we built and released, we saw these huge gains on these outcomes that we had been trying to impact previously and had been doing so incrementally. We with this new feature saw these sort of stepwise improvements where students were 50% more likely to receive helpful feedback on their writing. Teachers spent 50% less time grading, and overall writing increased by 70%. So just being able to achieve that level of outcomes with a relatively small amount of work was very motivating, and there's just so much more we can do with it.
Yeah, I would just like to add pretty much all the industries you can think of, like name an industry where there isn't a use case, there's always use cases. But again, going back to the things we already talked about, like think about the right use cases and the return on investment. So pretty much all of the industries from healthcare to medical to education to tech, we already seen it, to energy, to aircraft manufacturing, to pretty much everything and anything. And then you go deeper into each of those fields, and there's definitely use cases. If you're asking about, like if you want to start your own and you're asking about what not to do, try not to do like a wrapper or OpenAI and any of those tools, because as we've seen, they keep coming up with new features, and then those get disrupted. But there is enough, like if you can do a niche specific, there is enough market to do that right now. And I would just want to mention, this is exactly what I talk about in my podcast with industry leaders. What are they working on? So do tune into that. That's a plug for my podcast, AI Unfiltered. I'll put the link in the chat.
I listened to that podcast as well, and it's very illuminating. Some really interesting questions get tackled there. We'll continue to ask our panelists some more questions, audience questions, but if I may There is a brief survey, 2-minute survey. I know it will not take more than 2 minutes because I designed it. If you can, our audience members can kindly tell us their feedback on how did they like the session, whether they learned something new, and what future topics they would like us to tackle in some of these Celebrating Technology Leaders future webinar sessions, then that will be extremely helpful for me and my organizing team. All right, looking at other audience questions. So we have discussed ROI. What could be some of the ways to manage the costs associated with generative AI? It could be cloud costs, it could be training costs, anything else. How have you managed or how have you seen enterprises manage costs of turning to this new technology? Whoever wants to go first.
I can touch a little bit. I think this is actually a very hard problem to answer. And as I'm doing some advisory, some startups, and many of them can recognize how quickly the costs can go up. So is there really concrete solution to Gen AI specific? I don't think there's a a definitely best practices yet. But what I advise people to do is go back to many people actually companies or teams and have experience optimize costs, reduce costs in cloud space, for example, and that's probably one of the more recent experience that people will have. And think about how you actually solve that, and then use that apply to your specific development case. Right. At the end, you still need to figure out what ROI, the first thing about is return, right? So what kind of return you're getting? Instead of focus on the cost, you focus on the return, what you're trying to get, and what it is. Figure out what is your comfort zone, and and in terms of your approach, right? What stage you are in the business or that particular project you're dealing with, a true optimization in a very mature product, or is it a blue sky, moonshot projects? And I think set that goal, and it will help you to much better and figure out how to optimize the cost. And the other thing is, do try to experiment. You can always try different architecture and experiment and see what will get you the best. And from that to build your capacity planning and cost prediction models, and use AI, use ML to solve your AI development problems. And yeah.
Would anyone else like to add to that? All right, cool. That was a great response to see what is actually the return that you are seeking, and that will determine what type of cost you can incur. And experimentation, of course, it's extremely important. So we did talk about on the Unfiltered AI podcast and a few other resources. We have shared some links in the chat as well. But let me finish with this question. What would be one or two concrete suggestions from you to our audience that can help them continue to learn and grow in this field? Could be anything. Mamta?
Yeah, my first go-to is ask questions, be curious. And the second one is like go to reputable sources. Like for me, it's Deep Learning AI by Dr. Andrew Ng. So I always look at, the courses that they offer, and a lot of them are free. And then there's some certifications on Coursera as well by Deep Learning. So go to those and try to separate the hype from, what's actually AI is able to do. Don't fall into the shiny light syndrome, like just chasing after that. But onto that, I will add, it's definitely important to upskill yourself. Our next generation is already just like earlier in resumes, if you remember, again, I'm aging myself, but there used to be a skill set where you would write Word and Excel and all of those things. And pretty soon it evolved, like it was a given. Everyone needs to have that. So it's going to be the same with prompting. Like our next generation is already growing up with it. So they're already going to be pretty hands-on with it. They'll know how to prompt different models in different ways, what to ask. But for us, make sure like we are using it the right way, optimizing it, and upskilling ourselves, whatever is needed for our job, because in this industry, you always have to keep upskilling yourself. So that will be my advice.
Rebecca?
Yeah, let's see. So I'm a big fan of podcasts and newsletters. I'll have to listen to yours, Mamta. But and I like finding resources that are talking about AI in the education space. So two recommendations I have are one, there's a podcast called EdTech Insiders, which has been doing a really great job with keeping up with AI advancements and bringing them to education. And then there's a newsletter, GSV, which is a venture firm, has Claire Zhao has a really great newsletter that tracks both larger developments within AI. She's an expert there, and then also the education specific AI news, and that's been sort of my Bible every week when it comes out.
Thank you for sharing that. Elaine?
So a couple things to add. One is, after we listen to those podcasts and reading and all those, do try to practice it yourself. That's the only way to learn. And the practice doesn't have to, find a project at work, do it your own, and try that for your personal use, and also try to explain it back the best you can. I find that, at least for me, unless I can explain it, I don't think I can actually get it. And start with little things. The first time I tried to explain, LLM, I actually tried to explain to my mom and help her to plan her trip last year. So, and if I can get my 80-year-old mom understand, what it's trying to do, it's probably a good start. So that's one thing. Second, though, for those still at school, don't forget your fundamental, the basics. You still need to get back to those. All these cutting edge things is great, prompt engineering, absolutely need to learn it. But fundamental, what is behind it? And go look at all the published papers. It's all math, right? Go back to the basics. That is what really will help all of us going for the long run.
Yeah, there's no getting away from math, whether you call it a good news or a bad news. For me, it's a good news. I love math.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. We're almost at the hour. Thank you, Rebecca, Elaine, Mamta, for sharing your thoughts so openly, and I love the humorous tidbits in there as well. For our audience members, this session would be available on demand as well, and we'll also post it on YouTube on the ACM Women playlist, and all the resources that we have mentioned here. We'll make sure that they are there, mentioned in the description, so you can have a look at them as well. Please do share your feedback. Let me know what topics you would like us to cover in our future sessions, and we hope to see you next time. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.